Well, any day now, we expect a decision from Ottawa on the proposed takeover of Nexen Energy by CNOOC. Well, CNOOC's connection to the Chinese government raises security questions, to be sure, but China has the money that the oil patch needs. Well, joining me now is Roger Robinson, Jr. He's a former Senior Director of International Economic Affairs at the National Security Council in the United States. He's the current president and CEO of RWR Advisory Group. He was also the former chairman of the Congressional U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. Thanks very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Tom.
You work at the intersection of finance and security. Is the Nexen deal a good one for Canada?
I think one has to be very concerned about the direction of this event. For example, if the Nexen deal is concluded, you can expect a queue of Chinese state-owned enterprises that are going to see the water as fine and have a kind of green light to move into other priority resource projects.
So you see this as a stalking horse. In other words, if Nexen is approved, that just opens the door for all sorts of takeovers.
I think that's right. And I think that China would love to be able to advertise a Canadian imprimatur as they move around the world looking for these kind of prize energy assets. So I don't think you can just look at this in isolation as the Nexen deal. It should be viewed as a string of potential Chinese transactions here, not just in the energy sector, but as we know in the telecommunications and other sectors of the economy. And some of those companies are more problematic than others. And I think CNOOC, for example, has a very large exposure in Iran. It has done business with Sudan that's widely viewed as a genocidal regime. You have to kind of be cognizant of the fact that these companies have multitaskings by the Chinese government. They're not just commercial entities.
Let me take you into the Prime Minister's office as we can imagine the decision being made on Nexen right now. And on the one hand are all the security concerns that you have outlined. And certainly these concerns no doubt have been transmitted to the Prime Minister from Washington. On the other hand is the need to have capital to develop this resource, to create markets in Asia. How do you see that balance working out between the need for security and the need for economic diversity on the other hand?
Well, in part, you know, I'm concerned about the U.S. decision on the Keystone Pipeline, and it begs the question, did we, in effect, force that issue a little bit on Canada to be looking for other markets than our own? So we, in my opinion, made a flawed decision there on the part of the Obama administration that needs to be corrected to make clear that Canada's energy is most welcome in the United States, as always, and the more the better. So that's one issue. You have a very high priority set of secure energy resources. This democracy, the safeguards in Canada, make it an extremely attractive place. You can attract all kinds of national and private companies from around the world. China doesn't really offer anything particularly unique. They are paying, reportedly at least, a 65% premium for Nexen. It begs the question, why? Why that large? Is it possible that they're looking for that Canadian imprimatur that I talked about earlier that gives them a kind of patina of legitimacy that perhaps they don't have now? What is that about? So I think that Canada has an opportunity to attract capital, frankly, from many different sources and has no particular dependency on Beijing in that context.
Let's look over the horizon. Final question for you. And let's go into the Oval Office on the day that Canada approves the Nexen takeover by CNOOC.
One of the questions that would be put before the President is there a sufficiently security-minded review going on? I think that Canada is seized with this issue. I do think that the security community's views are being taken seriously. Don't misunderstand me. The question is there a systemic arrangement, an interministerial arrangement that drives together the commercial economic on the one hand and the security portfolio on the other to ensure that Canada is not just looking at this in the near term, but may have to live with this for decades. And What is the trajectory of China? That would be another question for the president. Is China moving in a more belligerent direction these days? Look at the Japanese experience with the rare earth embargo, with the nationalistic attack on thousands of Japanese companies. They have 30,000 companies there. You'd think that that would moderate Chinese behavior toward them, if anything would. But it hasn't. And so I think that's quite instructive as to the heavy-handedness you're seeing with an ascendant People's Liberation Army, which most analysts concur with, that complicates and frankly makes more unpredictable China today. So these are the kinds of conversations that would probably take place in the Oval Office to caution the president, who in turn can speak to his counterpart here in Canada and perhaps offer advice about the road that is being traveled here and the perils of that road.
Roger Robinson, thank you very much for your time. Fascinating talking to you.
Thank you.
Well, that is our show for this week. Before we go, here's a look at what's coming up this week on Parliament's plate. On Monday, watch for the by-elections in Victoria, Calgary, of course, and Durham. On Tuesday, the bill on single-game betting could be defeated after third reading in the Senate. And on Wednesday, Marc Garneau will announce that he, too, is entering the